My name is Sarah, and my story is about survival and healing. The man I unfortunately once called father was a monster who was destroying my life. If you've ever felt trapped, hopeless, or struggling to find your place in the world, this story is for you. Join me on this journey of overcoming adversity and discover how sometimes our greatest battles can lead to our greatest victories. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, hit the like button, share this video, and leave a comment about my story. Thank you in advance. Today, at 21, I can still smell the coffee my mom used to brew every morning. It was 2016. I was 13, and that routine seemed eternal. Waking up to the aroma of coffee, finding her smile in the kitchen, and hearing her voice humming while preparing my breakfast. Dad had already left for work, as usual. Our life was simple, but I was happy. I didn't know everything would change so fast. It started with small memory lapses. Mom burned the rice a few times, something that never happened before. Then came the stumbling. She said it was just fatigue, but I could see her fear when she dropped plates or when her hands trembled while holding her coffee cup. Dad noticed too, but chose to ignore it at first. It was on a Tuesday when she fell in the kitchen and couldn't get up. I remember the desperation in his voice on the phone, calling 911. The diagnosis came after 2 weeks of tests. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, words I could barely pronounce back then. The doctor explained calmly, but his words felt like knives. Mom cried silently, holding my hand. Dad went mute, his face a stone mask. On the way back home, nobody said a word. The silence weighed more than all the words in the world. The changes began slowly. First came the home adaptations. Grab bars in the bathroom, a special shower chair. Dad had to reduce his work hours to help with care. Money got tight. Bills started piling up. I watched the letters arriving and his face getting tenser each day. The first outbursts of anger came because of the medical bills. He would scream alone in his study, curse at the insurance company, pound his fist on the desk. It was on a Friday night when he yelled at me for the first time. I had dropped a glass of water on the kitchen floor. A simple glass. Within seconds, he was in front of me, his face red, screaming about money, about how I wasn't careful with anything, about how everything was falling apart. Mom tried to intervene from her wheelchair, but her voice was already too weak. I ran to my room and cried myself to sleep. After that day, I learned to measure every step, every word. The house became a minefield. I never knew what might trigger his fury. A low grade at school, a dirty dish in the sink, a TV show too loud. I started doing everything in silence. I learned to move like a ghost through the house, trying to be invisible. At school, my grades started dropping. My math teacher, Mrs. Thompson, asked if everything was okay at home. I lied, said I was just tired. At night, lying in bed, I could hear Mom's sobs coming from the next room. She was gradually losing her movements, and with them, her independence. Dad had to help her with everything, changing clothes, bathing, eating. Each passing day, he became more irritated, more explosive. The man who once took me for ice cream on Sundays had disappeared, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. That was just the beginning. I didn't know yet, but the screaming and anger were merely a prelude to what was coming. Sometimes, when I think about that time, I wish I could go back and hug that 13-year-old girl. Tell her to prepare herself, to hold tight to the memories of happy days, because they would be her only comfort in the dark years ahead. The first slap came 3 months after Mom's diagnosis. I had arrived late from school because I stayed in the library finishing an assignment. I hadn't warned them. My phone was dead. When I opened the door, Dad was waiting in the living room. He didn't say anything, just stood up and hit me across the face. The mark of his fingers stayed red for 2 days. I learned that silence and invisibility weren't enough anymore. That night, Mom cried so hard her breathing became difficult. She could no longer raise her arms to hug me, so I lay beside her on the hospital bed, and we stayed like that, in silence. Her tears soaked the pillow while I held her hand, which barely had the strength to squeeze mine. It was the last time I saw her cry. Soon after, the disease began affecting even her facial muscles. the routine transformed into a daily nightmare. Wake up early, prepare coffee, exactly how he liked it, no mistakes. Help the caregiver change mom, go to school. After returning, clean the house, make dinner, study. Any deviation from this routine meant trouble. I learned to hide the bruises with makeup I bought in secret. In summer, I wore long-sleeved shirts, even in the heat. At school, Ms. Baker, the art teacher, started paying more attention to me. In art class, she noticed my paintings were always dark, with distorted figures. One day, she asked me to stay after class. She asked about the bruises on my arm, which showed when my sleeve rolled up accidentally. I lied, said I fell off my bike. She didn't believe me, but didn't push it either. She just said her classroom was always open if I needed to talk. At home, Dad's shouts echoed through the house every night. He yelled at the caregiver, at the bills, at life itself. His salary barely covered the medications and the hospital bed rental. Then he started drinking. First only on weekends, then every day. The alcohol made him even more violent. He broke things, threw plates against the wall, pushed me around. Once he locked me in the basement for forgetting to buy his beer. Mom watched everything, a prisoner in her own body. Her eyes, the only part she could still move freely, followed me around the room. Sometimes, when Dad wasn't home, I would read to her. Books she liked, old magazines, anything to pretend we still had normal moments. I wasn't sure if she understood everything, but I liked to think she did. At school, my grades plummeted. I couldn't concentrate, was always tired, always afraid. Other students started avoiding me, and I never participated in group activities, never went to parties. Teachers sent letters home, concerned about my performance. Dad tore them all up without reading, saying I was stupid just like my sick mother. Each of his words felt like a knife wound. Ms. Baker kept trying to reach out. She gave me extra art supplies, let me use the classroom during lunch breaks to paint. Art became my only escape. On canvas, I put all the pain I couldn't express in words. I painted shadows, bars, chains, everything I felt inside. She kept my work carefully, as if understanding that those paintings were actually cries for help. That year, I learned that fear has many forms. It's in the sound of the key turning in the lock when Dad came home, in the smell of alcohol on him, in the sound of his footsteps climbing the stairs. I learned to read his moods by the noises he made, by the objects he broke, by the tone of his voice. Each day was a new lesson in survival, about how to become smaller, quieter, less existent. I was 14 and already knew the weight of the world. October 2019 arrived with a rain that wouldn't stop. Mom was getting weaker, needing oxygen constantly. The doctor had already warned us it was a matter of time, but nothing prepared me for that night. I was in my room doing homework when I heard the machines beeping. The caregiver shouted for Dad, who luckily was sober. I ran to her room, but they wouldn't let me in. I stayed in the hallway, listening to the raised voices, the sound of the ambulance arriving, the paramedics rushing up the stairs. I couldn't say goodbye. When they finally let me see her at the hospital, she was already gone. 16 years old and motherless. Dad stayed by her body for hours, quiet, looking smaller than he really was. It was the last time I saw him show any kind of genuine emotion. At the funeral, he maintained the pose of a devastated widower, receiving condolences with studied sorrow. I knew that mask too well. The days following the burial were filled with people bringing food no one ate, offering help no one asked for. Aunt Rachel, Mom's sister, suggested I come live with her in Boston. Dad refused immediately, saying I was his responsibility. Responsibility. As if I were just another bill to pay, another burden to carry. She left worried, leaving me her phone number. Dad tore up the paper as soon as she was gone. The house felt different without Mom. Her room was locked, the medical equipment returned, the caregiver dismissed. The silence was deafening. Dad started drinking more, now without even trying to hide it. He'd come home from work already drunk, stumbling through the rooms, knocking things over. The bills kept coming. Mom's treatment had left many debts. Each envelope meant another reason for his anger. One night, he smashed all of Mom's pictures he could find around the house. I hid in my room, listening to the sound of breaking glass, his words of hatred echoing through the hallways. He cursed her for getting sick, for spending all the money, for dying and leaving him alone with me. I saved only 3 photos I kept in my sock drawer. It was all I had left of her. At school, people treated me like I was made of glass. Teachers were more tolerant of my low grades. Classmates tried to make conversation with forced smiles. Only Ms. Baker kept treating me normally, letting me paint during breaks, respecting my silence. She noticed the bruises had increased, but didn't ask anymore. She just left band-aids and ointment in her desk drawer, which I would take when needed. The nights were the worst. Dad started bringing people home, bar friends who drank and made noise until late. I stayed locked in my room, putting the pillow over my head to muffle the sound of laughter, breaking bottles, arguments. Sometimes, someone would try to open my door. I put a chair against the doorknob to block it. I always slept fully dressed, ready to escape through the window if I had to. Mom's life insurance money arrived 3 months later. Dad paid some debts, but most of it went to alcohol and gambling. Food started running low at home. I learned to work miracles with the little we had, stretching packets of pasta for days. I got a part-time job at a stationery store near school, hidden from him. The money went into a secret fund, kept inside an old teddy bear. During that period, I discovered that loneliness has many layers. There's the physical loneliness of being alone at home while Dad was at the bar. There's the social loneliness of not being able to bring friends home or participate in normal teenage activities. But the worst is emotional loneliness, the one that comes from not having anyone left to share your fears, your pains, your small victories. Mom had taken with her the last person who really cared about me. One morning, I found Dad passed out on the couch, surrounded by empty bottles. Next to him was a crumpled paper, a termination letter. He had lost his job due to constant absences. At that moment, looking at this man I once called father, I understood that things would only get worse. I didn't know yet how much, but I felt the worst was yet to come. And I was right. March 2020 brought more than just the pandemic to our house. One Sunday afternoon, Dad came home with a woman. Mandy, he said, his girlfriend. She had dyed blonde hair, long red nails, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What a pretty girl," she said, hugging me. Her sweet perfume made me nauseous. 6 months after Mom's death, he had already found a replacement. Mandy moved into our house 2 weeks later. She arrived with 5 suitcases of clothes and an endless list of demands. Mom's room, which had remained closed, was emptied in a single day. I watched from the window as the donation truck took away the bed, the clothes, her belongings. Mandy supervised everything with a satisfied smile, like a queen taking possession of her new kingdom. I cried in the bathroom, biting a towel to muffle my sobs. Our home dynamic changed completely. Mandy didn't work, spending her days watching TV and giving orders. She demanded I do all the housework, complained about the food I prepared, inspected every corner I cleaned. When Dad came home, she always had a list of complaints about me. "Your daughter is rude. She disrespects me. She doesn't do anything right." He, always drunk, believed every word. The punishments became more frequent and creative. Mandy suggested most of them. Locking me in the basement became routine. Sometimes I'd stay there for hours, without food or water. Other times I was forced to clean the entire house on my knees while she watched her soap operas. If I complained, Dad appeared with his belt. I learned to swallow my tears, to endure the pain in silence. At school, I started skipping PE classes to avoid changing clothes in the locker room. One day, the money I had saved in the teddy bear disappeared. I found Mandy wearing a new dress the next day. When I confronted Dad, he beat me until I confessed that I was lying. That night, lying in bed with my body aching, I promised myself I would find a way out of there. I didn't know how or when, but I couldn't keep living like this. The pandemic brought remote learning, and with it, more problems. Dad refused to pay for internet, saying it was a waste of money. Ms. Baker, my art teacher, noticing my absence in online classes, started leaving printed activities at the school's front desk. I would pick them up in secret, twice a week. It was my only contact with the outside world. Mandy started rummaging through my room when I was out. She read my diary, went through my things, tore up my drawings. One day, she found the 3 photos of Mom that I had saved. She ripped them up in front of me, saying it was time to move on from the past. Dad watched the scene without saying anything, drinking his beer. That night, I cried myself to sleep, holding the torn pieces against my chest. The fights between them also started. Mandy spent all the money on clothes and makeup, while bills kept piling up. Dad, unemployed, drank more and more. When they fought, she always found a way to blame me. "Your daughter is too much trouble. We spend too much on her." They would end up united against me, their common enemy. The worst was when they made up. The reconciliations always happened at my expense. Mandy would invent some story about my bad behavior, and Dad needed to prove his love by punishing me severely. I learned to fear both the fights and the reconciliations. There were no safe moments in that house, only different levels of danger. I turned 17 without any celebration. That day, Mandy made a point of wearing the only necklace left from Mom, a delicate piece she used to wear on special occasions. I watched the necklace on her neck during dinner, remembering how Mom had worn it on my 13th birthday, the last one we spent together. Mandy smiled when she noticed my gaze, satisfied with yet another small cruelty. It was June 2020. The world was in lockdown, but for me, who already lived in a private prison, the pandemic was just another layer of isolation. On a particularly difficult night, after another session of screaming and accusations, I heard laughter coming from the street. I approached my bedroom window and saw a group of young people gathered in the abandoned house next door. They seemed so free, so different from the prisoner I was. For days, I observed that group from my window. They always met after 10 at night, when Dad was too drunk to notice anything and Mandy watched her soap operas at maximum volume. It was a group of 6 people, all seeming to be my age. They laughed, danced, drank. They lived. The pandemic seemed not to exist for them, and I began to think that maybe it shouldn't exist for me either. After all, what difference did it make? My life was already a constant risk. One night, I found the courage. I waited for Dad to pass out on the couch and Mandy to enter her deep sleep induced by pills. I climbed down from the window using the branches of the old tree in the backyard. Years of practice in planning escape routes would finally serve a purpose. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would give me away. But no one noticed my absence. The group welcomed me with surprising naturalness. Luke, Mary, John, Carrie, Pete, and Beth. They didn't ask many questions about the bruises I could barely hide. They offered beer, music, and for the first time in years, friendship. There, among strangers who quickly became friends, I found pieces of the adolescence that had been stolen from me. The night escapes became routine. 3 times a week, I would sneak out the window in search of those moments of freedom. With them, I learned to laugh again, to dance, to feel like I was 17. Mary lent me normal clothes, different from the long-sleeved shirts I always wore. Beth taught me how to cover the bruises with makeup techniques she used to cover her own marks. I never asked, but I think she had her own demons at home. During the day, I continued to be the silent and obedient Sarah. I cleaned the house, endured the abuse, pretended not to exist. But at night, with my new friends, I was someone else. Someone who could dream, who could exist beyond the walls of that house, beyond the fear. The contrast between these 2 lives was painful, but those moments of freedom were worth any risk. Luke was the first to try to kiss me. I recoiled, startled, decades of fear condensed into that instinctive movement. He didn't insist, just held my hand and said it was okay. He was the first boy who treated me like a person, not as something to be used or hurt. In the following weeks, he became my confidant, although I never told him the whole truth about my life. Months passed, and that group became my escape valve. While the world closed in quarantine, I found small cracks of freedom in the nights with my friends. We didn't wear masks, we didn't keep our distance. We were too young, too desperate for connection to care about a virus. The real danger, I thought, was at home, not in the nights with them. But freedom has its price. it became increasingly difficult to keep the two lives separate. I started making small slip-ups, coming home smelling of cigarettes, forgetting to remove all the makeup, dropping a note from Luke from my pocket. It was a matter of time until everything fell apart. And when it did, it was like a house of cards in the wind, fast, violent, and inevitable. Looking back today, I see those months as the beginning of my liberation. Not because of the moments of false freedom or the illusion of normalcy, but because it was through that group that I learned there was life beyond the walls of my prison. They showed me, even without knowing, that I deserved more than just surviving. I deserved to live. And it was this awareness that gave me strength for what was to come, when my little world of night escapes was discovered, and everything changed forever. Mandy discovered everything on a Thursday. She found a pack of cigarettes and a red lipstick hidden under my mattress during one of her surprise inspections. She didn't say anything at the time, just waited for Dad to come home. I was in the kitchen when I heard his footsteps climbing the stairs, heavy, threatening. I knew something was wrong by the smile on her face. The beating started in my room. He shouted about honor, about shame, about how I was just like my mother. Mandy watched from the doorway, her eyes gleaming with a sick pleasure. When he got tired of using his hands, he grabbed his belt. I don't know how long it lasted. At some point, I lost consciousness. I woke up in the basement, in the dark, locked in. The basement was damp and cold, without windows. A small skylight near the ceiling let in only a sliver of light. For the first few days, they gave me water and bread once a day. Mandy would come down the stairs humming, leaving the tray on the floor as if I were an animal. "This is for you to learn to be a good girl," she'd say. After 3 days, the food stopped coming. The thirst was unbearable. I licked the condensation off the walls to survive. Time lost meaning in the dark. It could have been days or weeks. My body ached from the beatings, and I felt feverish. At some point, I started having hallucinations. I saw Mom sitting beside me, smelled her perfume. She said I needed to be strong, that I needed to get out of there. On the 5th night, or was it the 6th, I heard an argument upstairs. Screams, breaking glass, the familiar sound of violence. I took advantage of their distraction to do something I should have done long ago: escape. The basement skylight was broken in one corner, covered by old boards. With the last strength I had left, I managed to remove them and crawl out. The night was cold, and I could barely walk. I stumbled through the streets without direction, just wanting to get as far away as possible from that house. I didn't recognize where I was. I had never been to this part of town. The streets became narrower, darker. At some point, my legs gave out, and I collapsed in front of a small house with low walls covered in ivy. That's how Ms. Olivia found me. She was returning from a house call when she saw me lying on her sidewalk. She didn't ask questions, just helped me inside. The interior of her house smelled of herbs and incense. There were candles everywhere and images of saints on the walls. She took me to a room in the back, cleaned my wounds with warm water and herbs, gave me hot tea. "You're safe here, child," she said as she applied an ointment to my bruised back. Her hands were warm and gentle, so different from the hands I knew. Ms. Olivia was an elderly black woman, with white hair tied in a bun, and large eyes that seemed to see through the soul. There was something about her that inspired trust, a quiet strength that emanated from her gestures. For days, she cared for me as no one had done since Mom's death. She prepared herbal baths, dressed my wounds, fed me with soups and teas. Gradually, I regained my strength. From the room's window, I could see people coming and going from her house. They were her children of faith, as she called them. Ms. Olivia was a healer, respected in the community for her gift of healing and her advice. At night, lying in the clean bed, I could hear the sounds of drums coming from the backyard. The rhythm of the drums had something hypnotic, comforting. For the first time in years, I didn't have nightmares. Ms. Olivia's herbs and her prayers seemed to create a barrier against the evil I had left behind. There, in that simple house that smelled of lavender and rue, I found more than a refuge. I found a path to true liberation. A few more days passed, and I turned 18 in Ms. Olivia's house. There was no party, no cake, just a warm hug and a necklace of colorful beads that she placed around my neck. "For protection," she said, her wise eyes studying me. At that moment, I found the courage and told her everything about Dad, Mandy, the years of abuse, the basement. Ms. Olivia listened in silence, holding my hands. When I finished, she stood up and said, "It's time to cut the chains, my child." That night, Ms. Olivia took me to the backyard. The smell of herbs and lit candles filled the air. In the center, there was a circle drawn with white chalk. She instructed me to enter the circle and sit on the ground. Around it, she placed candles of 7 colors, each representing a force of nature. She began to sing songs with requests to the saints, her deep voice reverberating all around. The ritual lasted for hours. Ms. Olivia danced around me, throwing herbs over me, fumigating the environment with incense. At certain moments, I felt as if something heavy was being torn from me. Other times, it was as if a warm light enveloped me. I cried, I trembled, I felt fear and relief. When it all ended, the sun was already beginning to rise. I felt exhausted, but strangely light. "What happened?" I asked, still dazed. Ms. Olivia smiled, her eyes shining with ancient wisdom. "We broke the spiritual chains that bound you to suffering, my child. Now you are protected. But remember, true strength comes from within. What we did here was open the path for your own healing." In the days that followed, I felt a profound change. It was as if a fog had lifted from my mind. I started helping Ms. Olivia with her consultations, learning about herbs, prayers, and the art of healing. The people who came seeking help looked at me curiously, but Ms. Olivia always said, "She's my apprentice." Gradually, I gained confidence, finding a purpose. 2 weeks after the ritual, I felt it was time to go back. Not out of longing or obligation, but to close that chapter of my life. Ms. Olivia understood without me having to explain. "Go," she said, "but know that you'll always have a home here." I left on a Sunday morning, my heart heavy but determined. The house was empty when I arrived. The front door was unlocked, as if inviting me in. Inside, the smell of mold, abandonment, and a strong burnt odor. I climbed the stairs slowly, remembering every moment of pain lived there. My room was intact, as if time had stopped. I took some clothes and my old diary. There was nothing else there for me anymore. When I went down to the kitchen, I realized the burnt smell was coming from there. A curtain and parts of the furniture had been consumed by flames, along with broken things and shattered glass. I felt a shiver and sensed that something big had happened. The neighbors told me there had been a terrible fight between Dad and Mandy a few days ago. No one knows exactly how it happened, but my father had severe burns on much of his body and had lost a leg and one of his hands, while Mandy was paralyzed. I didn't know what to think when I learned about the incident, so I returned to Miss Olivia's house that same afternoon, leaving behind not just the empty house, but all the weight of the past. She welcomed me with a hug, as if she knew I would return. "Your journey is just beginning, my child," she said. And she was right. Today, at 21, I still live with Miss Olivia. Our life is simple, sustained by donations from the children of faith and the little we earn from consultations. We don't have luxury, but we have peace. I help with the healing rituals, learn the secrets of herbs, welcome those who arrive broken as I once was. Each person I can help is a victory over my own past. Recently, I've started thinking about going back to school. Maybe study art, perhaps become a teacher one day. Ms. Olivia encourages me, says I have a gift for teaching. The future, for the first time, seems full of possibilities. As for my father and Mandy, fate, or perhaps something more powerful, had done its work. They now live in a small apartment in the suburbs, dependent on each other to survive. The irony of the situation didn't escape me. Those who had hurt me so much were now trapped in their own broken bodies. Trapped in their mutilated bodies, dependent on each other just as I was dependent on them for so long. I don't feel anger, nor pity, just a strange sensation that justice, somehow, has been served. Ms. Olivia's ritual not only freed me, but seems to have rebalanced the energies of the universe. From the darkness of abuse to the light of healing, my journey proves that it's possible to be reborn. Today, I help others find their strength, transforming my pain into purpose and celebrating each day of freedom gained. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell to never miss a video, leave your like, share the video, and leave your comment. Your opinion is super important. Thanks everyone, and see you next time.